morning, everyone. All right, glad to see you all back again. Freudian slip. All right, we want to, as we said last week, we want to keep the energy going, keep the momentum going. This is a Communiversity, this is a teach-in. All right, and so what we're going to do this week is jump into the first part of this 6-part series. The first part is actually in 3 pieces. The part is in 3 pieces. And the first half of this 6-part series deals with what we call African beginnings, okay? And then the second part of that 6-part series, the second half, which will be around March 3rd, I believe, it deals with the session called The Coming of the Europeans. So in the first half, we're going to lay the foundation, and then I got to give you an abridged version of it because we simply do not have the time. Typically, when I teach this class, it's usually a 2-hour class for 16 weeks. Even that's not enough time, but I'd like 4-hour classes personally, because you get time to dig in and people can pull back and do assignments and stuff. So, but anyway, we're going to work with what we got. So we're going to do the African beginnings, and we're going to show some of the early foundational cultural principles. This is before race, before racism. This is before the European. Okay, the Caucasoid, the European is a new person to our planet. They're only about 50,000 years old. They're new people to our planet. So we're not even dealing with them. We're dealing with what we call pre-colonial African cultural foundations. This was a period in history where African people had a chance to sit down and think, had a chance to build, had a chance to grow, and had a chance to interact. I was reading Smithsonian Magazine early this morning, and it seems that the anthropologists that dispatched through the Linguistic Society of America, they've discovered a people in Malaysia who speak with a new language. They've discovered a quote-unquote new language. There are like 7,000 recognized languages on the planet Earth. They've discovered a people among these tiny Malaysian people. There's around 300 of them speaking a language that they've never heard before. So they've been recording this thing. And what's interesting is that they call the language, I think they're calling it Jedka. They don't have a name for it yet. The name they're calling it, they dubbed it that because that's the common word that they're hearing in the language. So they just call it Jedka. I don't know what the people call it. But what's interesting is when they translate the words in the language, so far, there are no words in these people's culture that mean ownership. There's no word for stealing. There's no word for buying. There's no word for selling. But there are words for sharing. There are words that translate into exchange. There's words that translate into communalism. You see what I'm saying? So this is what happens when you have a group of people who have not been infected, if you will, with the virus of Western civilization. Okay? And so that is what happened really with the European coming into penetrating Africa. The African people, prior to the arrival and penetration of the European, we had our own language systems. We had our own cultural values. We had our own philosophy, our own cosmology, our own view of the world and view of the universe. Okay, and all of that was interrupted. I don't say shattered, but it was interrupted. And so we're trying to get back to that, and that's why we go to this concept constantly of Sankofa. Okay, we raised this last week. I'm going to keep going black to it because it's something we need to keep going black to. And I know in this society we suffer, a lot of us, from something they call presentism. You ever heard that term before? Presentism. That's like just a total, any ism is bad. Sexism, racism.
Yes, sir.
So presentism is a condition. It's really a psychological condition and a sociological condition where people are just obsessed with the moment, with being in the moment. There's no need to look back. There's no need to make connections. And that's ridiculous because you don't burn. You didn't learn nothing else from Fannie Lou Hamer. She said never burn the bridges that brought you across. You see what I'm saying? And so that's what is very significant about starting where we're starting with African cultural beginnings and cultural foundations. So that's what we're going to do today. I got some handouts for you. I I got some learning enrichment for you. Remember, I don't use the term homework. I got some learning enrichment for you to take with you. I'm not going to be here next Saturday, but Sister Pat and Brother Derek are going to be holding it down, keeping the momentum. I'm going to leave them a whole litany of instructions, and then they're going to add their own funk and their own style to it, and it's just going to be a nice little gumbo sauce next week too. So the learning enrichment that I hand out to you, there's 3 pieces to the learning enrichment. I'll do that at the end, and I'm hoping that when you all convene next week, that part of the session will involve following up with the learning enrichment that I gave. All right, so we're not giving grades in here or anything like that, but we're here because we love knowledge, okay, and we're dealing with knowledge. All right, so because we're dealing with Sankofa, we got to deal and go back to the wisdom of the Grand Master Teacher, Dr. John Henry Clark, peace be upon him. I had the good fortune to know Baba when he was alive. Spent a lot of time with him, sat at his feet. This is a man who had read in his lifetime over 20,000 books. Okay, I don't know a lot of people who have even seen, a lot of people haven't seen 20,000 books, much less read them. This is a man who educated some 6th generation of PhDs. So that's the thing we ask today. I know it's very fashionable to be these armchair historians and these public intellectuals and things of that nature. But the question I asked the Dysons and the question that I asked the Melissa Harris Perry, where are your students? Where are your students? I know it's all about them, the self-aggrandizement and stuff, but when you're dealing with the Grand Master, you ask the question, where are his students? They are all over the world. They are running Africana studies departments and black studies departments. They're publishing books. They're heading up centers. They're opening independent African-centered schools. They're all over the planet Earth, especially right here in the United States. This man was from Columbus, Georgia, a man who went blind. Okay, but still, the cataracts got a hold of him. He was living in New York, and still, even up into his higher 80s, out there teaching blind. You see what I'm saying? So this man sacrificed and committed his life to the study and the struggle of African people. A man who published multiple books, and you can see a lot of the history books that were published on Africana people. He would be asked to write the foreword to these books. So when you look at the books of Ivan Van Sertima, you look at the books of Malefi Asante, some of them, you look at the books of some of the reprints from Black Classic Press with Drusilla Dungy Houston and others, you'll see foreword by Dr. John Henry Clark. Someone told me once, old man said, if you want to know something, ask someone who knows something. All right. So this man left us with a serious legacy. Perhaps his greatest opus is a book that you all should get called Notes for an African World Revolution. Notes for an African World Revolution. That was his magnum opus. And that was the book that he put his soul and mind and spirit into. All right. So he told us that education is the highest form of struggle. Okay. And that's what we're trying to do this morning. So in beginning the story with the African beginnings, we need to get a concept of Africa. Got these handouts for you. Send these around. And the handout is double-sided. So if we just look at first at the 10 random facts about Africa, can we just go around and maybe read a few of those, if you will? Brother Malik, you want to read that first one? And
yes, sir.
Just maybe go around.
Africa is the second largest of the Earth's 7 continents.
Countries?
Continents.
Africa is the second largest of the Earth's countries?
Continents.
Oh, you mean Africa is a continent?
Yes, sir.
Oh, okay, thank you. Okay, tell me something I don't know.
And it makes up approximately 22% of the Earth's total land.
So you mean to tell me, brother, that the Earth, the planet Earth is 196,940,000 square miles, and the continent, not country, but the continent of Africa makes up 22% of 196,940,000 square miles?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Somebody do number 2, please.
There's a total of 54 independent nations in Africa.
How many?
54.
Now see, that's a political statement she just read. Because, again, when you're dealing with pre-colonial Africa, There were no 54 independent nations. There were no bordered states. The African wore his states like he wore his garment loose so the wind can blow through, right? We didn't believe, so that the partitioning of Africa, that the fact that there is, when you look at a map today, 54 independent nations is owing to the fact that the Europeans came in and carved that continent up. In fact, Cecil Rhodes called it a giant African cake. And they carved it up into 54 independent nations. The Brandenburg Germans, the Huguenot French, as well as the Catholic French. The Spain, the Spaniards, the Portuguese, who were the first to come in. The Anglo-Saxon British, the Swedes, all of them came in and carved different spheres of influence. And that's how Africa, that's why it looks the way it looks. When you see Kenya is a certain shape. Nairobi is a certain shape. Chad is a certain shape. Not only that, you look at the mountains. And you see the names of mountains given renamed by Europeans who penetrated and conquered that area of Africa. You see waterfalls and lakes called Lake Victoria, named after queen, so-called royalty in Europe, okay, who would come and basically lay claim to land, people, minerals, and resources. All right, so when you say Africa is 54 different nations, and it was as late as 5 years ago, it was 53. It became 54 because of the war that broke out in Sudan. And then they carved the northern Sudan into the southern Sudan. So this is a political thing, but again, I'm ahead of myself. We're dealing with pre-colonial Africa. Brother Derek wants to read number 3. I saw his hand.
Absolutely. The current population of Africa is nearly 1 billion people.
How many?
1 billion with a B.
Billion with a B.
In many African states, more than half of the population is under the age of 25.
Check that out. That means they're fighting age and working age. And you know how it is when you're fighting age and working age. But if there are no jobs, right, then the people start what? Working on each other, right? So half the population, it's a new continent, right? Europe, one of the, you talk to genealogists and demographers in America, one of the major concerns is the year 2040. Is because the year 2040, European Americans, Euro Americans are projected to become the minority inside the United States. The minority will be the Latino population. Not only that, but Europeans are getting older and grayer. If you look at reports from the Carsey Institute, which is a political science think tank at the University of New Hampshire, they said that whites are dying unnatural deaths. Unnatural deaths owing to opioid overdoses and things of this nature. You see what I'm saying? But also, so the average age of a European white man in the white population in the United States, their average age is 43. The average age of Latinos in the United States is 27. All right? So these old white folks will soon be taken care of by new generations of black, brown, working class people who are going to be basically paying into Social Security and all of the benefits and stuff. Yes, ma'am?
Could you let Trump know?
Let him know. See, I wish you all had some carrier pigeons. We sent a carrier pigeon to Washington and let him know. But this is what they're afraid of. This is what this is fueling a lot of the anxiety and the fear, right? Fear of a black planet. All right, so 1 billion people. Think about that for a minute. Shoes for 1 billion people. That's 2 billion armpits. Jobs for 1 billion people, right? So when we look at it like that, we also should understand the importance of what our ancestors in the 20s and 30s and 40s understood. Ancestors like William Patterson, ancestors like Paul Robeson, ancestors like Shirley Graham Du Bois. They understood the fact that we are not some lonely, isolated nation of Negroes in America, that we have kinship, brotherhood, and sisterhood with African people throughout the planet Earth. And we should engage in looking, in terms of assessing our situation in America, we need to become international in the way that we think, so that we can understand who we are, all right, and whose we are. Somebody do number 4. Brother Durango, why don't you do number 4? Get off your phone and do number 4. Get your nose out of that phone. Get off of Facebook and face the book. Brother Durango, I'm going to come hard for you. Do number 4 and do number 5, because I'm going to give you, because you got that youthful energy. I know you can do 2 of them.
Population experts estimate that there are at least 3,000 distinct ethnic groups in Africa.
Check that out.
Nigeria alone has more than 370 recognized ethnic groups with its population.
All right, did he say tribes? He said what? Ethnic groups. All right, so when you say tribes, again, you're ascribing to the pejorative racism of people like Edgar Rice Burroughs, who invented Tarzan, Oak Brook, Illinois, who invented Tarzan. All right, so we don't want it. We want to get away from the pejorative language like tribes and savages and these notions of when you think about Africa, you think about people in grass skirts with bones in their noses, swinging through swinging through trees, hollering oogla boogla, eating juniper roots and eating each other. Right? That's how we've been made to think about Africa through the miseducation process. The vines, in fact, that Tarzan swings on, if you want to find those vines anywhere, you got to go to the bayou of Louisiana and to the Catalina Islands off the coast of Los Angeles. No vines like that. So this is coming out of the cockeyed, skewed vision of the European. So we're dealing with ethnic groups, people with names, language, culture, folkways, religion, mores, spiritual systems, systems of God in the universe, system of cosmology, rites of passage program. All right, bringing young brothers into manhood, bringing young sisters into womanhood. Right, systems is what we're dealing with. That's culture. It's got nothing to do with race. Race has a beginning and an end. Foot race, dog race, horse race. Right, we're dealing with culture. The thing about the United States is that they keep us fixated on race and racism. And we never look, we don't get a chance to look at culture. And that's where the development is. Go ahead, do number 5, brother, please.
The Nile River is the longest river in the world with a total length of 4,132 miles.
4,132 miles.
The Nile is formed from the juncture of two smaller rivers, the White Nile and the Blue Nile.
Check that out, all right? So that is what was known, the Nile River, 4,132 miles, coming from where it has its start up in the northern part of Africa near the Mediterranean Sea, coming all the way down into the heartland of Africa. It was known as the world's longest cultural superhighway because river along these banks, the banks of the Nile, that's where African civilizations have propped up throughout time. All major cities and civilizations come up near bodies of water, right? St. Louis, New York, etc. All right. Somebody do number 6. Yes, sir, Brother Dixon.
Africa is home to the human species, which was developed there more than 5 million years ago.
Check that out. So in the 1960s, the anthropologist and paleontologist Charles Leakey, in the 1962, 1963, he was doing excavation in the old Adobe Gorge in Kenya. And it was Dr. Charles Leakey who let it leak out that the black man, the African man and woman, actually the African woman and the African people were the oldest people in civilization. Then they went back because they found some bones that were, at that time, they were around 2 million years old. Then they went back to Africa and they found some more bones that were 3 million. Then they went back and the most recent discovery is the bones of a sister. They named her Uan Mohogial. And they said her bones, dating her bone, they were around 4.8 million years old. And she had a mama. All right. So Africa cannot tell you the birth date of the black man and woman. We are the oldest people in creation, and we are a people of creation. Somebody do number 7. Who wants to do number 7? You don't have a handout. Oh, you got okay. Okay, you got okay. Go ahead.
Among the native population of Africa, there are more physical variations than on any other continent in the world.
Check that out. Because some of us think, we've been trained to think that if they don't look like Wesley Snipes, he must not be African. Right? So we got to bust that up as well. We're going to do that this morning. All right? What about number 8? Because this is where the scramble for Africa came in. This is why the European, the Arab, the Indian, the Chinese are in Africa right now. Somebody do number 8, please.
Africa has mineral resources, including aluminum ore.
Right. Or
bauxite. Bauxite. Okay. Chromium, cobalt, copper, diamonds, gold, iron ore, manganese, petroleum, platinum, and
check that out. Then why? Okay, if that's the case, if Africa is so minerally rich, why do we see these commercials with Sally Struthers? I'm Sally Struthers, and if you just gave 30 cents, just the price of a cup of coffee, we could get some food for little Abdullah. And then you see this little African boy with the big distended belly and the big head and the flies, right? Africa is the world's most vastly rich country in terms of mineral resources and groundwater. Because I know we get this image too of Africa as being this barren, desert, arid, but it has more physical ground and it has less desert per capita given its area than other parts of the world. All right, so we get this image of Africa as just savage, dark, backward place that's barren. Well, if it's so barren, why do they keep going in there? Why was there a scramble for Africa during the 1800s at the Berlin Conference, 1883? Why did European nations like the Belgians and the French and the Spaniards and the Brits, why did they come together and physically divide that continent up into pieces, into different why did Firestone go into Liberia and trick and exploit the Liberian people into signing a 199-year lease on the rubber plantations, and now you got Firestone Rubber Company, huh? If it's so minerally backward and poor. Why is America buying 17% of its oil from Nigeria if they're so backward? You know what I mean? So we got to bust up these myths. Go ahead, do number 9, somebody.
The continent of Africa is approximately 12 million square miles.
All right.
If you combine the United States, China, India, Europe, and Japan, they all fit into the continent of Africa.
Check that out.
The United States can fit almost 4 times. The United Kingdom can fit into Africa over 120 times.
All right, so we got, I mentioned to you that if you cannot read and write, they call that illiteracy. If you have trouble doing basic math and stuff, they call that innumeracy. And if you have trouble, if you're challenged geographically, you have problems identifying, they call that immapancy. So we want to bust up the immapancy, and we do that by giving us accurate depictions of the African continent so we can know the true size of Africa. And the last one I'll read, if you were anywhere on the African continent and dropped a jelly sandwich, it would probably land on the floor jelly side down. That's just true, wherever you go. All right. When I have people read these, they read that last one and they think something real heavy is coming. They're like,
put a scientific
some science on this, man. That's an African jelly, right? It's African. It's got to be African jelly. All right. So if you flip this over and go to the next page, this shows you the true size of Africa. Now, this map is not even accurate because of the outline of the African continent is not totally accurate. So I'll give you, I'll show you rather the perfect outline. So this is what it looks like in color. And by the way, if anybody wants any of these images or what, just email me. I'll be happy to send them to you. All right, any of these images. All right, so you can see here that the African continent can fit down. The various countries on the planet can fit down comfortably inside the African continent. All right. Can we go to, I want to deal with something in the, let me do this real quick. I want to deal with something in the packet. You have something in your packet called the Word of the Week. Can somebody read that Word of the Week? Are these extras? The Word of the Week should be on very early. I think it's on page 5. What's the Word of the Week this week?
Monolithic.
Monolithic. Monolithic. We got a compound word there. We got 2 words. What does the word mono mean? One. Singularity. And lithic. Lithic. That's a geology term. It means stone or of stone. Right? So when you put that word together, someone read the definition. It comes to mean
consisting of one piece or part, solid or unbroken.
Okay. Now that's a geology term, but we're going to apply it to sociology. That's page 5. We're going to apply it to sociology, and we're going to say that African people, whether you're talking about the anthropologists who went over there and looked at them, people who talk about them, people who've written about African, they've had this tendency to look at or view or frame African people as monolithic. That is, they're just one type of African. Right? They eat the same thing, they dress the same thing, all their music is the same, All they speak the same language. They look the same. You know how they say, so, we all look alike. So there's this tendency to look at people as monolithic, and that's very dangerous and it's very racist, right? And so we want to get away from that, and that's why we start again with this African beginnings to give us the context and give us background on the full suite. So I wanted to start this week also with this framing question. I'll send these to you as well, Brother Derek. Every week we'll have these framing questions. So this week's framing, that's not in the book, this is just on the slide. What ideas, practices, beliefs, thought modes, patterns, etc. comprise the basis of African systems of culture and cultural development, and how have we been able to apprehend, that is to seize them, grab them, to connect with them, and convey those things through the centuries through the leveraging of our Sankofa. Sankofa, we can describe that as cultural memory, okay? What you remember of yourself and of your people. So in other words, in these framing questions these are not questions for you to just answer in a word or two. These are questions that are supposed to prompt deep, reflective thought, critical thinking, in other words. Carter G. Woodson is famous for he said a lot, but two of the most famous things he said, number one, he said, most people have not experienced what's commonly known as thinking. Wow. Dr. Carter G. Woodson. The other thing that he said, and he valued education, but when education is used for misdeeds and is used to education can be used to miseducate. He also said that Harvard University has ruined more Negroes than bad whiskey. All right. So just because they got often the degree or the certification or got X, that means that if you've been in a system for X number of years, that means you've been partial to brain damage for that long. All right. So we got to check the quality of the education that we're getting. So these are deliberately, intentionally big, gigantic, critical questions that are supposed to go inside your brain. And at 2 o'clock in the morning, when you're doing the dishes or when you up getting that Entenmann's crumb cake, which you know you shouldn't be getting more than 2 slices of, but you put the knife here and then you move it down, make the slice extra big. Then you go through the reel. I mean, you really make it good. You get a little slice of butter and put it in the microwave. Right? When you up, these questions are supposed to be rolling around in your brain. Okay? And hopefully, the important thing is not for you to arrive at an answer. The important thing is for you to develop the question, to be able to understand the critical question and what it's trying to get you to do. So that's our framing question for today. Now, let's go to page 6 in the course packet, because there's something that we need to get to as well. That's the section called Locating and Leveraging the African and African American. All right. So can someone read that first paragraph there? I know it's a lot, but
African American history is the portion of American history that specifically discusses the African American or Black American ethnic groups in the United States. Most African Americans are the descendants of captive Africans who were kidnapped and brought to the United States during 1619 to 1865. Undoubtedly, nearly all African Americans share a common history of predominantly West African or Central African cultural roots, the Middle Passage, enslavement, and the diaspora. In fact, every day, we are learning more and more about these fascinating cultural connections.
That's right, because the study of Africana studies, it's in the current form, it did not really begin to take on a degree of formal seriousness until around the 1940s. And it was around the 1940s. I know I showed you the thing from the 1850s and stuff, but I'm saying in terms of the widespread formal study of it, especially within the academy. And it started really, believe it or not, with white Jewish historians. One of the most famous ones was a cat named Melville J. Herskovitz. And he wrote this book, a lot of books on genealogy. There was another one named Herbert Aptheker, and he wrote a book called The Myth of the Negro Past. There was another one named Leo Weiner, Weiner. He was a Harvard linguist, and he wrote a trilogy called Africa and the Discovery of America. So it really, really jumped off with white European Jewish scholars pushing this envelope. And then black scholars, we had been doing it anyway, but then we got involved really. And then in a heavy way, Black Studies was created in the academy, the first Black Studies program by Dr. Nathan Hare out in Oakland, California in 1968 on the heels of the Civil Rights Movement, the height of it, and Dr. King's assassination. So that opened up the door in the university for the formal study, if you will, development of programs of study, developments of centers and degrees and specialists and all of the things of that nature. All right. So we're going to come back to that word diaspora in a minute. I wanted to go back to the African continent in terms of its size, which is approximately how many million square miles? You all remember that? 12 million. All right. So again, showing you that if you see images of the African continent on most maps, the common image that you see looks like that shape of the outline of the continent. That is from what they call the Mercator maps. And those were maps that had been around for a long time, but recently, I'd say like in the late 80s, 90s, they came out with a more accurate map, which was known as the Peters projection map. Peters projection map, and this is a more accurate depiction of what the African continent looks like. On most maps, when you look up here, you'll see, like up here where Greenland is, on most maps, Greenland looks like 14 times bigger than it really is. So Africa is really, and all of the continents really are, they look like they're stretched. In fact, it looks like the end of one of those old Chinese movies, you know, when you're watching the credits and the people look real skinny when they're walking, but it's stretched like that. And so we need to understand, okay, that. And you can also see it's mostly green, right? This is a NASA photo, a NASA image, satellite image. It's mostly green, and of course the brown areas are the desert areas. But you can see the most of a lot of Africa, probably most of it, is green and lush and fertile. Now it's not as green and lush and fertile as South America over here, but it is not as arid as people would have you believe, like that there's no water there. That's why the Chinese, that's one of the reasons why the Chinese are in Africa, because they got a problem over there with in China with population. They don't have the geography, they don't have enough room, and they got a smog problem over there. And they can't plant trees fast enough to help them get rid of the smog, and they got a water problem. All right, and so one of the things that they're doing so much in Africa in terms of infrastructure, they got glass factories, cement factories. They're doing all sorts of mining. They're building bridges. They're doing a lot of stuff over there. But one of the main things they're doing, and the Arabs, they're building water filtration plants. And they're going into Lake Chad. They're going into Lake Victoria. They're going into the Congo River, into the Limpopo River, into the Zaire River, and into the Nile River. And they're extracting water, cleaning that water, and then flying it back to China, flying it back to Saudi Arabia. Because the Arabs especially have a serious water problem.
If we wanted to witness, to go there to see some of what's changing and being constructed right now, what area of the continent would we go to?
Well, I mean, some of the more stable areas. I mean, there are a lot of stable areas. Ghana, of course. They do a lot of promotion. In fact, Ghana, the Ghanaian government, it was the first actually to get its independence back in 1957 under the great Osachifo Kwame Nkrumah. All right.
March 6th.
March 6th, brother corrected me. March 6th, 1957. Right. So that was the beginning of the African independence explosion. Brother Kwame Nkrumah came to Harlem. He studied at Lincoln University in Nebraska, HBCU, right? And so he, since then up until now, have extended the door open to black Americans to come back, dual citizenship, etc. He said, Senegal is another country that people do a lot of travel in, of course. Ethiopia is another one. In fact, we're doing a thing here with some people at the university. We're trying to take a group of students to South Africa next year. You see what I'm saying? So South Africa is another one that's opened up. Gabon, the country of Gabon, it's a Central African country, is another one.
Is that hard to get to?
No. I mean, you go like you would go to Milan, Italy. You go
Well,
and
we've been
yes,
like-
yes, sir.
Can I give my 2 cents?
Go ahead.
So I've been to 13 countries in Africa, and from my opinion, purely my opinion, the best introduction to Africa from an African American would be Ghana. Number one, they speak English primarily. It was a former British colony. Number two, it's real Africa, what you want to expect, but it's enough Western where you won't be overwhelmed.
Good
So
point.
I've been to Gabon,
Yeah.
Gabon rather, and it's not difficult to get to. However, they speak French, and it's tends towards maybe about 80-20 as far as the real Africa versus Western accommodations. Senegal the same way. Even though it's some Westerns,
French.
it's still about 70-30. And as an African American, used to your European American ways, which we all are. We all
Yeah.
want to go to a warm bed. We all want to go have hot water.
Big
Ghana
Macs.
will give you enough of it where you won't be overwhelmed, and because in Senegal I had to go in a hole. There wasn't a toilet there, so you had to go in a hole, and that was just normal. That was probably the most advanced, because some people are going in the river.
Yeah, I'll be at home. I'm a Spartan. All I need is a bowl of rice and some gym shoes. That's all I need. I'm good to go.
I'm sorry.
No, you're good, brother. I appreciate that. So Ghana, in fact, there's a group of students, IUPUI students, who are going to Ghana this summer. I think they're going for 12 days. Yeah.
But you should go on my trip, 'cause I go every year.
You go every year?
Yeah.
I gotta get with you on that.
I have a trip that I organized. We just got back in July.
Now, we went to Ghana. I've been to Ghana and to Togo.
In Togo.
Yeah.
Togo. All right. So can you get the door, brother? Okay, thank you. All right, so we want to talk this morning about some of the diversity. Now, it's too much, of course, to get through, and I'm mindful of the time. I want to give you an overview of these, what we call these forms of diversity in Africa. 3 main forms I'm going to deal with this morning. And the first form is biodiversity. The second one is the heterogeneity. And the third one is cultural diversity. Okay, so when we talk about biodiversity, heterogeneity, cultural diversity, I'm talking about these things relative to the African continent and its people, and her people. All right, so you all got those? All right, first one, biodiversity. There are 3 types of diversity under biodiversity. We have the genetic, the species, and the ecosystem diversity. By biodiversity, what we're talking about, of course, are the animals, the plants, the terrain, the climate, and the weather. Those are 2 different things, climate and weather. And then, of course, water. When I say that, I mean that there's different types of water in Africa. There's throughout the African continent. There's blue water, green water, black water, red water, silver water, all types of water. So these are just 6: animals, plants, terrain, climate, weather, water. The list is much longer than that, and it's much more. So when we talk about, for example, terrain, some parts of Africa are very mountainy. Some parts of Africa are hilly. Some parts of Africa, they're valleys. Some parts of Africa is desert. Some parts of Africa is grassland. Some parts of Africa is very, very lush and fertile. Not jungle. Forest. It's a forest. Okay, we got to get out of that Tarzan stuff. Now, it's not a jungle. They're not tribes. When I was a young boy, I used to watch this cartoon, Johnny Quest. Y'all know that one? Johnny Quest, Benton Quest, and Race Bannon, and all that kind of. So I'm looking at I still like watching cartoons, and I'm looking at it as an adult now, and I noticed something on the opening credits for Johnny Quest. Brother looked like Babyface, Kenny Edmonds. On the, I looked over there, I started thinking about Whip Appeal when I saw it. That was a compliment, by the way. Okay. I'm looking at the opening credits for the Johnny Quest, and then they introduced the characters. It's like a movie, but it's a cartoon. It's real dramatic. They got the spy music. Let's see, he on it. See that? So when the credits open, they introduce the characters just like they do in the movie. You know, Idris Elba, Tandy Newton. So it says Race Bannon. Oh, so Dr. Race Bannon. He's then his assistant. I'm sorry, Dr. Benton Quest. Then his assistant, Race Bannon. Then they introduced the two boys, Johnny Quest. His friend, this little Indian boy, little Hindi boy, his name is Haji. And then they say Bandit. Now what I noticed about that is that the white characters have last names. The Indian and the dog is just one name. See what I'm saying? So the Indian has no surname. He has no parents. He has no history. But he's been taken in by these white, it's a familiar story. So I just something that came to me when I was thinking about this. So terrain, we're talking also about the various types of terrain. Weather, some parts of Africa it snows. You go up to Mount Kilimanjaro in Kenya, it's snowing up there. You would not associate snow with the African continent. Now I know some of our people in Nigeria and some folks in Ghana, I know brothers and sisters in Ghana, when they celebrate the Christmas. And they be spraying that fake snow in their windows and stuff. And, that's that Western infiltration, you see what I'm saying? But it snows in Africa, real snow. You wouldn't think that, So I'm just giving you this to give you an overview, a quick overview of the immense diversity of that continent. It would have to be that diverse because it's 12 million square miles, so it's not going to all look the same wherever you go. You see what I'm saying? So if it's that large, if it is the second largest continent on the earth, you're definitely going to see this type of wide species diversity and genetic diversity, etc. Okay? So this is an image from Darlene Clark Hines' textbook, The African American Odyssey, and this one shows you again the desert up here in the top portion, the top almost third of Africa. Some people call it, erroneously, they call it the Sahara Desert. Sahara is a word that means desert. It's an Arabic word that means, so when you say the Sahara Desert, you mean the desert. So we say the desert or the Sahara. And then you have the fertile, lush area here, but you can also see different rivers, look like blue veins running throughout the African continent. And more importantly, you see here this band that stretches across. I don't know if you can see that red line. Right below that red line, I want you to write this word down, Sahel. S-A-H-E-L. The Sahel. The Sahel is an intermediary region that divides the arid region from the fertile region. It just doesn't, like the desert sand just doesn't stop and then it turns green there. There's an intermediate area that's hundreds of miles long or wide that divides these two areas. All right, the Sahel. We'll come back to that in a minute.
And it is Sahel. So I've been in that.
Yeah, me too.
From Western Sahara to Mauritania.
That's right.
It's rocky and.
Check that out. When I was in Egypt, we went down to Nubia or up to Nubia.
Right.
Up to Nubia. We went up to because that's deep. We got to give them the way the physical continent lays, and so when you say Upper Egypt, you mean down south, and when you say Lower Egypt, you mean up north or up south and down north. Because Africans are oriented to the south. They're not oriented to the north like Western countries are. So when you look on any map, it'll say the big N. African people are oriented to the south. Okay? So their worldview is totally different. It's like when you go to Australia, the water runs counterclockwise. It doesn't run in the direction it runs here. So when I was in Egypt, in Nubia rather, we're driving down this road, and on one side you see nothing but desert, arid, just expanse of a wasteland. And on this side is total lush, plush greenery, trees and water and the whole nine. Life and death. You see what I'm saying? As we're driving down that road. So we were near the Sahel when we were over there. Okay, the second major form of diversity we want to get to, this is known as heterogeneity. And this, of course, refers to the people. This is genetic diversity in terms of one's complexion, in terms of one's hair texture, in terms of the shape of the eyes, in terms of your nasal aperture, the shape of your nose, the shape of your cranium, your stature. So you have some Africans who are tall and slender, some Africans who are short and stocky, some Africans who are rotund and round, right? You have some Africans who are naturally red complexion, naturally brown complexion, naturally yellow, not mixed with any people. These are unmixed people that represent this immense diversity in the world. You see what I'm saying? And then the last form that I want to deal with is the cultural diversity. I'm going to give you a quick and dirty definition of culture. Culture, what we do. That's culture, what we do. So by culture, we mean one's attire, the cuisine that people are known for. Like you go to an Ethiopian restaurant, you're going to get the injera bread, right? You go to a Mexican restaurant. One of my colleagues the other day said, we should go out and get some Mexican. I'll show you where the real enchiladas are, real tacos. I said, okay. So they're known for that. Right? You go to, you know, we might be known for red beans and rice. Are we known for red beans and rice? We might be, right? Then you have language. Okay, I told you the thing about languages. Brother Durango, who's still on his phone, man.
My mom too.
You're, who?
My mom.
Okay, I thought that was okay. Okay, you gotta keep an eye on you. All right, so even with language, the brother said that there in Nigeria over 370 different dialects. Okay, so these are different languages and religions, myths and rituals, folk tales and things of that nature. All of this immense cultural diversity within the continent. These are some Yoruba priests of Obatala, the deity Obatala, and they decorate and adorn their body. You can look at their bodies and see they're wearing their culture. You look at their clothing, you look at the headdress, you look at the ornamentation around the neck and the jewelry on the wrist and everything. All of that is symbolic, and it means something. And it means something different among different groups of African people who raise their children different, who worship different, who ate different, etc. All right? That brings us into another portion where we have another word for you, giving you a lot of vocabulary. I'm trying to upgrade you. This term African variance. You can get this definition down. It did not come from my diary. It came straight from the white boy, live and direct, official tissue, as they say in Brooklyn. All right. From Cambridge Dictionary, a variant is a form or a version of something that differs slightly from other forms of the same thing. That should say, that's a typo. It should say things. All right. Y'all got that?
Like a Toyota and a Chevy.
Like a Toyota and a Chevy. They're both automobiles, right? All poodles are dogs, but not all dogs are poodles. Okay. Y'all got that definition? So if you look at that definition and then look at these images, what are these?
Ants.
Okay. Now, there are different types of ants, right? You got the red army ant, you got the brown ant, you got the leaf cutter ant, you got all these different ants. Well, what is it that all of these ants have in common? They got all those variations, but what do they have in common? They all have how many antennae?
2.
They all have how many mandibles, the jaw? 2. They all have how many legs? 6. They all have the 3 segmented body, the head, thorax, and abdomen. You see what I'm saying? They all look different. They have different habits. They cluster differently. They eat. They have different diets. They have different. But what? They're all ants. All right. So that should help us when we look at these Africans and understand that though you have this immense amount of heterogeneity or differentness among us, that we're all African people. Whether you're talking about African people in Texas, or African people in Honduras, African people in Panama, African people in Guyana, Panama. All right. African people all over the global diaspora, okay, have these things in common. So again, that last definition, variant, is a form or version of something that differs slightly from other forms of the same thing. All right. I'll take that Ivan Van Serta will take over here.
Ran down. There are 6, I think, at least 6 variants in African. There is the Nilotic variant, for example. The Nilotic variant includes people like the Nua and the Dinka and the Shilluk and the Anahuac. They occupy the Nile River basin in the southern Sudan. He describes how relatively tall they are, what types of noses. That these are black, unmixed Africans. Then there is the elongated variant, and he runs that down. There are the Fulani, the Tutsi, the Hema, the Maasai, the Gala, the Tigrians, the Amharas, the Somali, the Beja. These are Africans. These are not mixed peoples. Then there's the so-called true Negro. That's what the European fixed upon. As Diop said, if that's the only Negro you know, then all of us are fake Negroes.
All right, so you ain't got to go to Wakanda or Marvel Comics to get your African on. You can come right here to the Turner Forum for Truth and Justice and get it. All right, let's move on real quick to something else. The second paragraph on page 6. Malik, you ain't doing nothing. Why don't you go and read that? You ain't got nowhere to go.
Cultural heritage is a source.
What kind of heritage?
Cultural.
Racial?
Cultural.
Okay.
Cultural heritage is a source of inestimable pride to most of us. However, it is much more than that. Even for illiterate and innumerate people, cultural heritage is the source of our sense of identity. This is why people give their lives to preserve such cultural artifacts as their language, surnames, their art, and the beauties of their literature, music, food, folklore, and religious rites. The concept of culture may be disputed, but few would deny that it includes these things and that they are precious to us, more so even than our physical survival. The demise of a great culture can be viewed as a fate worse than death.
That's right. That's why when the Tasmanians, the brothers and sisters from that island off the southeast coast of Australia, Tasmania, right? These are people, African people, who had been in isolation for nearly 60,000 years. And when the Europeans, quote unquote, discovered them in the 1600s, they came into Tasmania in 1640s, and under a white European named Abel Tasman, he named Tasmania, Abel Tasman. And when he was Dutch, and when the Dutch came into Tasmania, they destroyed. They killed men, women, children, and babies. I can tell you some things that they did, but we in church. The stuff they did, I mean, you wouldn't be able to turn your hair white if I told you some of the stuff. Discovery Magazine did a whole issue on the Tasmanians. And what happened is that they killed every last Tasmanian man, woman, and child. I mean, they exterminated them. Genocide. And what happens, we know, and that's why the brother read that the demise of a great culture can be viewed as a fate worse than death. These are people whose names we'll never know, whose songs we'll never sing, whose stories we'll never read about. And what happens when you lose your culture, you wind up in a museum. See what I'm saying? And that's why that's why I'm very protective of our culture. And that's why I hate that, for example, we had to, not me, but some of us, we had to wait for Ken Burns, a white critic, a white cultural historian, to give us the blues. We had to wait for a white boy to go down to the Delta of Mississippi and Yazoo and talk to black blues musicians and their families, and then give us a documentary, Ken Burns Presents the Blues, or Martin Scorsese Presents the Blues. We had to wait for them to discover jazz. These are our creations, and we should have ownership of these things. But you protect what you create through the building of institutions. That's why institutional development is so important. See what I'm saying? So that's one of the things they like keeping us fixated on in this country, is that they don't want us dealing with our cultural development, they don't want us linking up with Africa, and they don't want us to study ourselves. That's why it's very important. And don't get tricked with the Black Panther. So I like the fact that the movie coming out and everything, but again, you got a white company, Marvel Comics, delivering you a fictitious African country, right, on the heels of the Black Panther, the Black Panthers. They cool with you, so they down with you spending that dollar to go see that movie and feeling good about some fictitiousness, but the real deal we not interested in.
That's right.
See what I'm saying? So I like the fact the movie coming out too, but I'm not in the Matrix like that. I ain't getting it twisted like that, because I'm gonna be doing this. I mean, they're gonna be having to wipe drool from my mouth and wheel me in. I'm gonna still be doing this. You see what I'm saying? So it's very important. So if we flip on over to page 7, there's something very important in the center of those photos, and this has to do with the diversity, the 3 forms of diversity. At present, scientists have identified at least 6 variants or different types of Africans. Now, within those types, there are many different ethnic groups within one particular type. Okay? At least 6 variants or different types of Africans who exhibit various colors, hair textures, body types, and cultural practices. This is what's so key here, these 3 things. Weather, ecology, and diet. Those 3 things are just 3 factors that contribute to the incredible variety seen among African indigenous people. In certain parts of the continent, I think in more so the northern part, they eat more wheat-based foods. North of the or south of the Sahara, they eat more millet-based foods. So thousands and thousands and thousands of years of eating certain types of food, your bones mineralize in different ways. And you begin to take on different characteristics physically. So in other words, you are what you eat. The Maasai people of Kenya have red complexion. For tens of thousands of years, these African people ingest cow's blood. Right? It's just part of a ritual that they do. They drink it for virility and fertility. And if you look at the African, they're not mixed with Native American. No, they're red complexion. You go to other parts of Africa, like Botswana, South Africa, you see like a yellowish among those Africans. Because Africa, again, African people are the mothers and fathers of civilization. So you're going to find every group within us. Now who said this? It's Public Enemy on Fear of a Black Planet. Black man, black woman, black baby. White man, white woman, white baby. Black man, white woman, black baby. Black man, white woman, or white man, black woman, black baby. You see what I'm saying? So this is what is known as this intersex relationships or miscegenation or racial mixing. But even with that, I saw a young little sister in the Chipotle last night. I just stopped to get a little something. And a little sister in there, she was she was with a white guy. But she was very not fair complexioned. Because if she was fair complexion, then a dark person is what? Unfair complexion. No, not fair complexion. She was extremely light complexion. And I got an eye for this kind of thing, and I looked at that kitchen. And I looked at this sister's hair, I said, yeah, he got a black woman somewhere. That's a sister. That's a sister's daughter right there. You know, obviously, you can see it. And so so what's interesting to me as a teacher, I got a sister in my class right now. She's 21 years old. And I knew it when I first saw her before she even opened her mouth. I knew she was either mixed or she had been around whites a lot. And so I just had them writing these autobiographies, little memoirs, you know. So she's 21 years old. She's been on the planet 21 years, probably conscious for like 6 months of those 21 years. But she revealed that when she was a baby, she was adopted into an all-white family. They adopted her, you see. And she said, she went on to say that she's grown up with an identity crisis. She's not known, like she didn't feel welcome with black people, and she felt rejected from whites. She wasn't black enough for the black folks. She wasn't white enough for the white people. So she's like this sort of like a no person, you know. She felt like she was just sort of hovering in the balance, and it's causing all sorts of psychological confusion and like who do I stand with and stuff like that. And you know, it's so this sort of thing, it has real material consequences in people's lives. They grow up with this, and it's more especially tragic when they can't get it resolved. and they don't get a resolution. So they grow up as older people, and then they might have a daughter or something. And I mean, you don't have your stuff straight. How you gonna raise a child and make the child right? This is what happened with Lil' Kim. You know, Lil' Kim did all that plastic surgery on herself. If you read an article she did, an interview she did in Newsweek in 1990, she talked about the fact that her father used to always tell her how ugly she was. Michael Jackson, Joe Jackson did this to him. Used to always tell her how ugly she was, how big her nose was, how she was unattractive. That's supposed to be your first love, your parents. And so she grew up in total shame and rejection of herself, and she started hanging out on the block, hanging with drug dealers and stuff. They started turning her out. They jumped her into the gang. And before you know it, here she is now, because she has the money, she can do that sort of damage to herself. A lot of blacks don't have that kind of money, so they do other types of damage to themselves. But she got the money. She can afford a $500,000 plastic surgery thing. Most black people don't have money like that, so they do damage in other ways. They get the Fix-A-Flat from the dollar store and put it in there, you know what I'm saying? But anyway, weather, ecology, and diet. So you are what you eat is what changes the African people. So let's look at these variants real quick. If you go to page 8, and we'll get through these 6 variants, and then we may stop. I'll give you this homework. I'm sorry, learning enrichment. Slipped up there. All right, so the 6 different variants of the Africans, I have it up here for you in color as well. These are adapted from Dr. Keith Crawford's essay, Racial Identity of Egyptian Populations, based on analysis of physical remains, and Dr. Ivan Van Sertima's book, Egypt, Child of Africa. Here we have the first variant, the elongated, and you can see the different features that I put down here, the dark skin, the spiraled hair. These are people who come, who reside among the Fulani and the Tutsi, the Beya, the Somali people. Then we have the next one, which is the Nilotic variant. These people tend to be much darker, all right? They tend to have a narrow head. These are people, the Dinka people, the Anuak people, Southern Sudan, Sudanese folks. Then we have the so-called broad true Negro variant, okay? Anthony Anderson would be in that category, all right? And these are people who come from various regions throughout Africa, different countries, Cote d'Ivoire, Liberia, Mauritania, etc. Then we have the Khoisan Bushman variant. Now look at Nelson Mandela. Now someone would say, oh, he's mixed with Chinese. Or he's mixed with, because he is, right? They don't have the, almost they have it, the epicanthic fold or the extra skin over the eye. But that's because that part of Africa, for centuries or for millennia, windy down there. And this comes from your body just changing, doing this here against the wind. You know how it is when it's a very, very windy day? You do like this, you squint. And so your body over millennia, thousands and thousands of years, has adapted to account for the physical environment in which you find yourself having to try to survive. Your body adapted.
Some people call it evolution.
Some people call it evolution. All right? Flat Earth. All right, and then the last of the 6 of the cartoon, or the 5th of the 6 of the cartoon variant. All right, and these are folks who reside around Nubia, Meroitic people, Lake Moreau, that region. And then we have the so-called Twa or Bantu. Now the Twa, the derogatory name, was known as pygmy. But we don't use that term because we're trying to make our vocabulary in here first class. So we know them as the Twa or the Batwa people from the forest of Central Africa. This includes the areas of Rwanda, Burundi. Anybody ever had any Burundi coffee? Oh my God, ooh, that's some good coffee. Uganda, Congo, Angola, etc. All right, and they have distinct characteristics and such based on where they lived and survived for millennia. These are African people from the Solomon Islands. They are not mixed. These are brothers and sisters, or brothers, let me go back, from Fiji. These are in the Polynesian Islands here. And these are brothers, this is a brother from the Polynesian Island, Solomon Islands, with the blonde hair. These are children from that region. These are Fijian warriors, all right, from Polynesia. Again, You would think that they were mixed with European, but they're not. Because I told you that African, I don't know why this thing keeps switching. African people we're the oldest people on the planet, and we have the genetic capacity for blue eyes, for blonde hair, for green eyes. It's all there. Blue eyes is a genetic mutation. It's a mutation that hit these people, and the blue eyes have only been around around 60,000 years. It's an evolutionary mutation. All right, but these folks in the Solomon Island have African people. They have naturally blonde hair. They're not mixed with European. There were no Europeans on the planet that long ago. You see. All right. So I'm going to try to wind this down now, because this moves us into the diaspora. This is what we'll follow up with for next week. To talk on the diaspora, I'm going to leave lots of material on that. There's a couple of videos as well. And then I'll give you these learning enrichment